The first few months into grieving, time seems to pass excruciatingly slow. But 3 years later, when you look back, time seems to have whizzed past. It's confusing, to say the least, but not as confusing as it is to actually feel that pain. Because you know you can't bring that person back. And that whole process kind of evolves into a constant numbing pain. Because you know letting out those feelings isn't going to make it go away. And it's infuriating, and you want to scream and shout against the reality of that, but you know it won't do anything. And expressing those emotions isn't going to turn back time. So instead, we live with this constant awareness of pain, loss, emptiness. It's as if there's this turmoil of anger and loss living inside of us like a tornado. But to the outside world, we may even look so far as to be seen as collected. You feel that nobody understands you, and that feeling of being isolated in your agony is the worst. The world looks so different then, it seems terrifying. Surviving seems impossible, and everything seems to be crashing down. So in that situation, we do what any rational human being would do. We push it down. We push down everything. The gaping hole, the confusion, the pain, especially the pain. The pain goes right down. And if you ever feel it rising to the surface, you shut it down reflexively. It's incredible how quick you can shift your thoughts to avoid facing with grief head on. And if you're too late, and you can already feel the tears welling up in your eyes, you know you won't be a functioning human anytime soon. Which is why we go to lengths to avoid it. I imagine it like a humongous tank, but how instead tanks are usually filled with water, which is very healthy for us. This one's filled with pain, right to the brim. But we close this tank tightly, confident in its ability to keep that tornado secured. And we go about a day pretending that everything's fine, there's no pain inside of us, what pain? And absolutely ignore every feeling and pretend that we're numb to everything. But what we don't realize is that along with the fact that we're pretty clearly not being able to give a decent amount of effort into each day, that tank of pain, it sort of develops holes. Really minute ones, which is why we don't recognize them. But we're so lost and confused ourselves, we don't see them. But they're there, and that pain is leaking, and it's seeping into our everyday actions. But we don't see them. And don't even try to deny that there are no holes. There are always holes, because if there weren't any, it would be perfectly easy for us to just stuff that tank into the back of our mind and forget about it and never face that pain. But we do at some point, be it 2 days after losing someone or 2 years. Going through grief for so long, the one thing I've come across the most are the 5 stages to it. Denial, where you refuse to accept that somebody's actually gone. Anger against the situation. Bargaining, where you offer to get anything back or give anything to get that person back, even yourself sometimes. And depression, which I think a lot of us have gone through at some point in our lives. And acceptance, where you finally accept that this person is gone. And as helpful as it is to know that these stages exist, a lot of people don't really go through them in that order, and some people don't go through some of the stages at all, which just makes it even more difficult to understand. Grieving is a unique process, not just on an individual basis, but on the basis of the death concern, which is why it's so difficult to work through. During this time, you feel like you just can't continue. You feel absolutely shattered. You feel reduced to nothing. You feel the farthest thing from strong, but that's okay. You don't have to be strong. Nobody in their right mind is going to expect you to be strong here. And owning up and saying that you're not isn't going to make you weak. But we do have to face these feelings at some point. Taking one's time is so important, but just stuffing those feelings and never acknowledging them isn't going to help either. I know it's scary and terrifying to feel that pain, but we do need to face these feelings at some point. Even if it's 1 day after or 1 year after, it's important to face them. I know it's equally important to take that time out for yourself, but facing these feelings is equally as important. And we need to realize that as scary as and as terrifying as facing it is, if we don't do that, we're just elongating that whole process, and it's just going to be that much harder for us to ever be okay. During this time, you can't schedule when you're going to sit down and deal with those feelings, because then they rarely show up. And when you least expect it to, the littlest things breaks you, and then the tank bursts completely, forcefully, and the tornado escapes. It engulfs you. You can't breathe for the pain. You can't think. You can't control any aspect of it, which just makes it that much harder. Sometimes you even feel guilty or in some way responsible for the death, which is insane to even wrap your minds around, which is why counseling and therapy is so strongly recommended, because then you have this person who can guide you through this and who can help you find yourself again. Or if you're not comfortable talking to somebody you don't know, even somebody you do, but just opening yourself up and pouring your heart out is such a good way to start the healing process. If you're not ready to talk about it, even journaling, I know it seems like the weirdest task, especially in that mindset, to get up and write what you're feeling. But I'm telling you, it gives you such a good visualization of your feelings, and you're able to understand what's bothering you the most, and you can work through that through small steps. If you're religious, you can even talk to God, you can pray, you can have faith in Him, and that is a beautiful way to work through grieving. And one thing you shouldn't do is refuse help. If you really need it, if somebody offers to drop you to work or drop you anywhere or help you with the housework, if you need it, take it. There's nothing wrong with requiring help. Don't be afraid to require help. Extremely important as well to stay physically healthy. I know in that period of time, drinking water and eating food seemed like the most insignificant things at that point, but it's so important to do that. Look at it this way. If you're mentally not okay and physically you're not doing the basic things you need to live, as a living being, it's not the best combination. If you have this heavy anchor anchoring you to those dark times, you're not going to be able to restart your life. But don't feel bad about constantly thinking about them or not being able to get up each day and live each day. There's no proper way of grieving. You can only do what you're capable of doing at that period of time. But on the other hand, don't feel bad for not thinking about them or living each day or making decisions without them, because that is not a bad thing. Surviving doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you've forgotten that person. You can't forget somebody who's had such an impact on your life. It's impossible. You're just learning to adapt and to cope with what happened. During this time, a question that pops up the most is that, does that pain ever go away? And the answer is not a positive one, and something that you probably expected. But no, it doesn't go away. When they come into your mind, it's difficult to ignore that sudden urge of wanting to see them one last time, wanting to meet them, wanting to tell them how much they're loved, how dearly they're being missed. But I guess the only promise here is that eventually you get to a day where that pain isn't as invasive, isn't as constant. You learn to survive with the pain. You learn to move with the pain. On a more brighter note, what absolutely blows my mind is that there are some people who have such unique ways of dealing with grief. They either conquer things they previously feared, or they honor the person who passed away in a beautiful manner, or in the case of Christina Grimmie, who was a singer and was tragically murdered at her own concert at the age of 22, and whose death still affects me to this day, almost 3 years later. Her family created an organization to provide emotional as well as financial support and encouragement for individuals and families facing, who are affected by the devastating effects of gun violence, as well as providing support for families facing breast cancer diagnosis. And there are tons of other organizations just like this one, and it's so touching to see that these people who have been so hurt, trying to help and reach out to other people who've been that hurt as well, but they probably don't know each other, but they're still trying to help each other. And even people who don't even know what it's like to lose someone, trying to pitch in their support. And that is something so incredible to see them coming together almost like a family to be there for one another. And it just goes to show that even something as heart-wrenching and as terrible as death and pain can have such a positive impact on humanity. And that's something that death can never hope to take away from us. Thank you.